Singer Marvin Gaye was shot to death last Sunday on the eve of his 45th birthday. His father, Marvin Gaye Sr., was booked on suspicion of murder and ordered to undergo psychiatric tests. Marvin Gaye's music survives him.
Soul singer Marvin Gaye, whose career spanned over 25 years, including the birth of the Motown sound to the 80s, was shot to death yesterday in Los Angeles. Dick Shoemaker reports.
One gunshot, a legend falls. The culprit, unimaginable to all, was none other than the victim's own father. It sounds like a horror novel, but it's a chilling truth from the American entertainment world. Marvin Gaye, the soul icon whose mesmerizing voice once silenced the world, died in a way no one could have dared to imagine, at his own home, right before his birthday. But that's not the whole story. After his death, people discovered an abandoned mansion, cloaked in the dust of time, surrounded by ghostly rumors no one dared to verify. A massive inherited fortune in the end amounted to nothing. Marvin's life wasn't just a tragedy. It was a series of bizarre, dark, and cruel twists. And it all began the day he was born. On April 2, 1939, in a rundown public hospital in Washington, D.C., Marvin Pence Gaye Jr.'s first cry pierced the stifling air of the delivery room. But no one could have guessed that cry was an omen of a life soaked in blood and tears. He began his days in the Fairfax public housing, a gloomy street corner where crooked rows of buildings huddled together, the musty stench of brick walls mingling with the relentless bickering of neighbors. It was a cold spring afternoon when Alberta, his mother, held her newborn in her arms, eyes brimming with tears, trying to hide her pain as she caught the hushed gossip from the neighbor ladies lingering in the hallway. Meanwhile, Marvin Gaye Sr., his father, didn't even bother showing up to meet his son. He was holed up in their little house, wearing Alberta's bright red silk robe, singing hymns alone in a dark corner, his breath reeking of cheap liquor. A preacher of the House of God sect, yet a devil in human skin. He wasn't just strange, often wearing his wife's clothes in some sick game, but he made the whole neighborhood shudder whenever he came near. Who dare speak up to a man as terrifying as he was unhinged? And that was just the start of Marvin Pence Gaye Jr.'s childhood tragedy. One Sunday morning in early 1943, in the sex ramshackle little church, the clear voice of 4-year-old Marvin rang out for the first time amid the choir. That sound was like sunlight breaking through the night, making the congregation leap to their feet, clapping wildly, entranced. Marvin Sr. stood at the pulpit, nodding smugly as if he'd crafted this genius himself, then later pulled the boy to an old, moldy piano, its wood so worn it seemed ready to splinter, teaching him a few trembling notes. But that father-son joy popped like a soap bubble. That same night, bitter cold creeping in, Marvin stood in the cramped Fairfax living room, singing a hymn again for his mother, his warm voice cutting through the damp air. Suddenly, Marvin Sr. stormed in, fresh from the bar. The moment he heard his son's voice, he grabbed a shiny black leather whip, his face flushed with booze. He raised it high, lashing it down onto the wooden table beside Marvin with a thunderous crack, sending the boy tumbling back in shock, his heart pounding like it might burst. Alberta rushed to cradle him, hands shaking, but Marvin Sr. shoved her aside like she was trash. He berated his son for singing without his permission. Fear and shame latched onto Marvin in that moment, like a dagger plunged deep into his chest, never to be pulled out. The nightmare years, of course, didn't stop there. Time passed, and Marvin grew up under his father's dark shadow, with music as his only escape. One October afternoon in 1951, as golden leaves drifted outside the Fairfax yard, he sneaked over to a neighbor's house. Standing in their tiny kitchen filled with the smell of baked bread, turning on the radio to hear vibrant doo-wop melodies flood the air. That music swept him up, pulling him away from the suffocating church and Marvin Sr.'s beatings. He was hooked, eyes sparkling as he pictured himself singing on a big stage. Caught up in the thrill beneath a blazing sunset, Marvin stood in the backyard, belting out a secular tune, his pure voice blending with the wind rustling through bare trees. But that joy was snuffed out fast. Marvin Sr. heard it from inside, storming out like a tornado, a coiled electrical cord in his grip, eyes icy cold. He wrapped it around Marvin's wrist, yanking him inside, leaving angry red welts on his skin that burned like fire. He roared that this house was for God's songs only, not the filthy music of the world. Alberta stood nearby, trying to pull her husband off, but he shoved her so hard she nearly cracked her head on the wall. Then the blows rained down on his son. The little house drowned in a suffocating air, a prison in every sense. The older Marvin got, the more he ached to break free from that iron cage. One July night in 1955, at 16, under the dim glow of a Fairfax County fair, he sang with the doo-wop group The Marquis before a few dozen folks. His voice boomed, rich with feeling, drowning out the crowd's chatter, earning endless applause as they stood captivated. He tasted freedom for the first time, but even that moment wasn't whole. Marvin Sr. appeared out of nowhere, pushing through the crowd like a ghost from a nightmare, clutching a hefty wooden cane, his face twisted with rabid fury. He bellowed into the night, telling everyone to stop listening, that Marvin was betraying God and family. His voice rang out like a curse, overpowering Marvin's song. Marvin froze, heart racing, staring at his father with a mix of fear and defiance, then kept singing, voice trembling but unyielding. The crowd cheered on, undeterred by the mad old man's threats. Marvin Sr. turned and stomped off, his heavy steps kicking up dust, leaving Marvin with a fleeting sense of victory, laced with heartbreak. Of course, it wasn't that easy, only the thick crowd kept him from charging back, and another beating awaited at home. Alberta rushed over from the fair's edge, wrapping her son tight in the midst of the chaos, her hands trembling as she whispered he'd done great, though she knew the price of this rebellion would be more terror ahead. But the more he was caged, beaten, and cursed, the fiercer Marvin's hunger for freedom burned. One rainy November night in 1958, as cold wind whipped through Fairfax's dark streets, he decided to ditch it all and join the new moonglows. He stepped out in a tattered old coat, rain soaking his shoulders, heart tangled in a mess of love for his mom and hatred for his dad. But Marvin Sr. wouldn't let him go quietly. He burst out the front door, clutching a sharp little kitchen knife usually used for carving meat, staggering from liquor. He yelled into the storm, demanding Marvin come back or disgrace the family and be disowned forever. His voice cut through the thunder, echoing like a threat from the grave. But Marvin was set on running, heart pounding, wet shoes slipping on muddy roads, finally ducking into a bandmate's place, panting in a cramped room thick with cigarette smoke. The next morning, as the rain cleared, Alberta tracked him down, her shoes soaked, hugging him in that chilly room. She urged him to go live for himself, but even after leaving, he never forgot her. Though he wanted to sever ties with his father, his love for his mother kept tearing at his heart. He vowed to himself he'd come back to protect her once he was strong enough. Leaving Fairfax behind, Marvin started a new journey. Fate took him to England in mid-1961, where he stood on the stage of Detroit's 20 Grand Club, his voice ringing out like a declaration of freedom, overpowering the crowd's roar below. Berry Gordy, Motown's kingpin, sat in the front row, eyes glinting like a wolf spotting prey when he clocked this raw gem. After the show, Gordy approached Marvin, promising to make him a shining star, and a contract offer came right after. But the day before signing, on the afternoon of May 19th, Marvin Sr. showed up unannounced at Marvin's tiny Detroit apartment. He'd tracked his son down through a letter Marvin sent to his mom. Clutching a rusty old pistol, his eyes trembling with rage and desperation, he stood there like a ghost from the past, muttering that Marvin couldn't leave him, that he had to come back for the family. Marvin knew running wasn't an option. Who could outrun a bullet? He stepped forward cautiously, heart hammering, gently pushing the gun down, his eyes flashing with resolve, silently telling his father he wouldn't return to that prison. Marvin Sr. couldn't force him, and instead gave up. He dropped the gun, turned, and left in silence, his heavy steps creaking on the old wooden stairs. Marvin thought maybe his dad had finally softened, finally let him sing. He really believed it. The next day, Marvin signed with Motown, paving the way for Stubborn Kind of Fellow in 1962, a massive hit that shook the music world. He even hoped to mend things with his father. But deep down, memories of that violent, bizarre man stayed like a knife in his heart, never pulled free. Those early Motown days seemed like a fresh light, but the darkness soon crept back. One July morning in 1961, Marvin stood in Motown's cramped Detroit studio, sweat beading on his forehead under flickering neon lights, the hum of recording gear mixing with cigarette smoke from the tech crew. Berry Gordy sat behind the console, tapping a beat on a stack of contracts, his face cold as ice. He told Marvin he could only sing what Gordy picked, that his music had to be upbeat, marketable, no deep emotions needed. Marvin sang, voice bursting with life, but every note got interrupted, tweaked, forced into Gordy's pop mold. He felt an invisible noose tightening around his neck from day one. Berry didn't want an artist, he wanted a puppet. Marvin had a gut feeling Gordy wasn't much different from his dad, but he couldn't quit so soon. So he swallowed his anger, followed orders. What he didn't see coming was that this golden Motown cage would become a nightmare prison, trapping his soul for 2 decades. Marvin's life got shackled tighter when he stepped into marriage. It wasn't arranged or forced, but it might as well have been a second noose from the Gordy clan, slipped around his neck without him noticing. In April 1963, in a small Detroit church, sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting bright patches on his glossy black suit. Before him stood Anna Gordy, Berry's sister, a powerful woman with a cryptic smile. They exchanged vows, Marvin's voice blending with the organ, ringing out like a promise of eternal joy. Anna whispered they'd create miracles together, and at first they were a perfect pair. She shaped Marvin's style, from his clothes to his stage presence, while he fell for her smarts and charm. But beneath the glamour, a storm was brewing. Anna wanted to control his every move, and Marvin, with that fire for freedom in his chest, started feeling choked in his own marriage. The first crack showed one winter night in December 1965 in their swanky Detroit home. Anna stood before reporters, cradling a newborn, announcing Marvin Gaye III, their new joy, a gift to the family. But behind the flashing cameras, a dark secret stayed buried. The kid wasn't Anna's. It came from Marvin's fling with Denise Gordy, Anna's 15-year-old niece. Anna's harsh grip left Marvin stifled and starved for love. In a weak moment, he fell into Denise's arms, a playful, vibrant girl who always brought him smiles. The night before the baby's announcement, in their pitch-black bedroom, Anna caught Denise sobbing on a chair, confessing she'd had Marvin's child. Anna froze, face pale, screaming at Marvin that he'd ruined their family, that he was a worthless traitor. Marvin dropped to his knees, begging forgiveness, swearing he didn't want to lose her, that it was just a slip. Anna hurled a lamp at the floor, glass shattering like her heart. They hid the truth from the public for years, but the rift in Anna's soul never healed. From then on, every look at Marvin was betrayal, every glance at the kid was humiliation. Their marriage grew more suffocating by the day. In those days, music and friendship were Marvin's only outlets, but even that world shook. One fall afternoon in October 1967, he stood on stage at Hampton-Sydney College in Virginia, his voice weaving with Tammy Terrell's "In Ain't No Mountain High Enough." The 2,000-strong crowd was spellbound, stage lights pulsing like their heartbeats. Tammy, with her radiant smile, was Marvin's perfect duet partner. They didn't just sing, they spun love stories in every note. But mid-crescendo, Tammy stumbled, arms dropping, then collapsed into Marvin's arms. He caught her, heart pounding like it had burst, eyes darting in panic over the hushed crowd. He yelled for her to wake up, but she was out cold. He sang on, voice shaky, masking his fear, though he knew deep down something awful was happening. Doctors rushed her off, and their faces darkened with the diagnosis: a brain tumor, a death sentence hanging over his dearest friend. From then on, Marvin stuck by Tammy's side. In a frigid Philadelphia hospital, he sat by her bed, holding her hand tight, singing "You're All I Need to Get By" to ease her pain. Tammy smiled faintly, saying he sang better with her near, but her eyes dimmed day by day. Each time he left the room, dread gnawed at him, terrified she'd slip away while he was gone. He ditched every gig, ignoring Motown's threats to cut him loose, spending hours with Tammy, telling her of his dream to make an album beyond shallow pop, that he'd do it for her. But deep inside, he knew their time was slipping away like sand through his fingers. The nightmare closed in on March 14, 1970, when Marvin stepped into Tammy's room again, heavy with news from the doctors that she had little time left. Weak sunlight filtered through the window, highlighting her pale face. He knelt by her bed, clutching her hand, begging her not to leave him, that he needed her to keep going. Tammy opened her eyes one last time, gave a faint smile, promising he'd always be her greatest brother, telling him not to stop singing. She slipped away that day, leaving Marvin alone in the cold room. He screamed, tearing the silence apart, pounding his fists in grief and helplessness. Blood streaked the white hospital wall, but his hands didn't stop. Nurses rushed in, pulling him back, but Marvin sobbed and raged, yelling he'd let her die, that he should have saved her. Tammy's death didn't just take his closest friend, it shoved him into a pitch-black abyss where no light could reach. Tammy's death stabbed Marvin Gaye's heart, leaving him in that icy Philadelphia hospital room, the long beep of the heart monitor still echoing. After that day, he wasn't the man who'd once captivated millions. He locked himself in his house, refusing every gig for nearly 2 years. One bleak night in October 1970, with Detroit's sky heavy with dark clouds, he stood on his downtown house rooftop, whiskey bottle in hand, staring at the black streets flickering with car lights. He screamed inside, saying he couldn't live without Tammy, that life had no point. He smashed the bottle on the ground, shards scattering like his broken life, nearly throwing himself off too, but an old Moonglows buddy, stopping by, yanked him back just in time. The friend gripped Marvin's shoulders, insisting he had to live, that Tammy wouldn't want this, but Marvin just shook his head, eyes bloodshot, muttering his soul died with her. The days after, Marvin sank deeper. One snowy December morning that year, he sat on the cold wooden floor, surrounded by empty bottles and cocaine-dusted plates. He blew thousands a week on that deadly powder, snorting long lines to numb the pain, mumbling to himself that Tammy was still out there. Motown, under Berry Gordy's thumb, kept sending folks to bang on his door, pushing him back to the stage, threatening to drop him if he didn't play ball. But Marvin didn't care. He said he wasn't Berry's puppet, that the guy couldn't own him forever. Still, Marvin had quietly started gearing up to honor Tammy's memory with a return, though not in a way Berry would like. He knew that for sure. High on cocaine, he scribbled the first notes of What's Going On, a protest against a crumbling world mirroring his own shattered heart. He wrote for those powerless against the Vietnam War, the social injustices, the pain he saw on the news daily. Months later, with rare sunlight cutting through his dusty office window, Marvin brought the What's Going On draft to Berry Gordy's Detroit office. The plush room, ebony desk, black leather chairs, couldn't hide the tension. Marvin stood before Berry, eyes red from sleepless nights, voice raspy from coke and sorrow, saying this was his soul, that he had to make this album to speak the truth. But Berry, behind his desk, face dark as a storm brewing, griped that political music would tank Marvin's career, that fans wanted peppy pop, not heavy philosophy. He ripped the draft apart right there, pages fluttering down like bits of Marvin's dream. The air was taut as a guitar string. Marvin warned if Berry didn't release it, he'd kill the contract and torch Motown. The two men faced off, breaths heavy, just a wooden desk between them. Finally, Berry gritted his teeth, gave in, but warned if it flopped, Marvin would pay big. Career, fame, all up in smoke. The album dropped in May 1971, selling over 2 million copies, a masterpiece that shook the world, but the win brought no peace. Marvin and Berry's already rotten bond hit a breaking point, a wound that kept bleeding, and Berry later whined to kin that Marvin betrayed the whole Gordy clan. Meanwhile, his marriage to Anna Gordy was crumbling hard. Since Tammy's death, Marvin had lost all taste for that prison-like life. When Anna heard from her brother that Marvin was bucking him, she stormed the room where he'd been hiding out for 2 years. Seeing papers strewn with Tammy's name and songs he'd written for his lost friend, she lost it, snatching and tearing them up, bits falling like snow. She said Marvin was ruining Motown, that he didn't care about her by defying the Gordys. Marvin shot up, shoved her back, stormed out in a rage, roaring he wasn't living to please her or Berry anymore. From then on, they lived like strangers under one roof, every glance a knife, every encounter a silent war. The fight with Barry wasn't just about music. It lit the fuse that blew his marriage to Anna apart. Yet Barry later kept calling Marvin the guy who broke his sister's heart, never seeing his own role in the mess. His fury at Marvin slipping Motown's tight grip with "What's Going On?" Chasing creative freedom blinded him. He helped wreck his sister's marriage without even knowing it. With his marriage to Anna in tatters, Marvin got reckless, and that mood bled into his music and love life. He dove headfirst into a new romance. It started one June afternoon in 1973 in a cramped LA studio recording "Let's Get It On," his voice dripping with passion and heat when his eyes locked on Janice Hunter, a 17-year-old with a beaming smile in the corner, hair flowing in the breeze. Janice was there with her mom, Barbara Hunter, a friend of Ed Townsend, who co-wrote and produced the track with Marvin. That chance meeting sparked a wildfire in Marvin. They plunged into a whirlwind affair. One starry August night in 1973, atop a ritzy LA hotel, Marvin pointed at the sky, promising Janice the world. Anna found out a month later, bursting into the studio to catch Marvin and Janice cozy under dim lights, laughing. She froze, then lunged, yanking the mic from Marvin's hand, screaming inside that he must think she's blind, that she'd given him everything, and he still cheated. The fight dragged on for 2 hours, but this time, Marvin wouldn't back down. Anna left in tears, filing for divorce the next day, ending a decade of painful union. Like Barry, she never saw her own faults in it. At the same time, his clash with Barry hit a boiling point. On October 1st, 1973, post-divorce filing in Motown's LA office, cigar smoke from Barry's legal team choked the air. Barry strode in, clutching a thick stack of papers, telling Marvin he could produce "Let's Get It On" freely. But every note still belonged to Motown, that he'd never escape. Marvin didn't care anymore, blasting Motown as a jail and Barry its warden, saying he'd rather die than stay under his thumb. Barry coolly shot back that Marvin owed him his whole career, that he'd never break free. The legal battle stretched for months. By year's end, Marvin won production rights, but at a steep cost. Barry slashed funding, delayed releases, forcing Marvin to dig into his own pockets to finish. On the last night of December 1973, in a dark studio, Marvin sat alone, singing "Let's Get It On." His final notes, voice cracking from coke and stress, each sound like a self-inflicted wound. The song was both triumph and tragedy. Overcoming that, Marvin's life picked up. Hits brought cash and big gig deals, but fate wasn't done with him. His bond with Janice, once a bright spot, soon darkened. In August 1974, Marvin joyfully cradled his newborn daughter Nona, singing lullabies in his deep voice under sunlight streaming through a big window. Janice stood nearby, smiling, proud of their perfect family. A year later, little Frankie arrived, and Marvin sang again, his voice a pledge of better days. Sadly, that happiness faded fast. One winter night in December 1976, as cold wind swept through Hollywood, Marvin stumbled home high on cocaine, eyes bloodshot. Janice, holding Frankie, sobbed in the living room, telling him he couldn't keep this up, that he was wrecking them. But Marvin snapped she couldn't boss him around, smashing a bottle on the floor, glass flying everywhere. Janice, panicked, clutched her son and ran to the bedroom, heart racing, seeing the man she loved turn into a monster from drugs and booze. She was powerless. Marvin's finances crashed too. In his lavish Hollywood pad, he opened an IRS letter, hands shaking as he read he owed $4.5 million in taxes, ballooning to $9.2 million with personal debts, a financial death sentence. When IRS agents came to seize assets, Marvin bolted to the balcony, hurling his Grammy into the yard, frantically shooing them off, but it didn't stop them. He ended up fleeing to London for a spell to dodge the IRS beast. Family strife flared again one fall night in October 1977. Back from London, Marvin's jacket reeked of strange perfume, eyes glazed from coke. Janice, suspecting cheating, rifled through his pockets, trembling as she found a handkerchief embroidered with an E, a hint of Eugenie Vyse, his rumored London fling. She tore it up in front of him, yelling he'd betrayed her, that she couldn't take it. Marvin snatched the scraps, denied the affair, shouting he was Marvin Gaye, and he'd do what he damn well pleased, that she had no right to control him. The fight raged till midnight. Janice tossed stuff into the yard, dishes smashing, while Marvin bashed their old piano, the one he'd composed for her on, wood splintering, its screeches like their broken souls crying out. Around then, his divorce from Anna hit its peak. Late November 1977, in an LA courtroom, Marvin faced the judge, hands quaking with fury as Anna demanded $1 million in alimony. Broke from coke and new music, he yelled how she could want more from a man with nothing left. Anna, eyes icy, said he'd ruined her, ruined the Gordys, that she wanted justice for years of betrayal. The court ruled Marvin pay $600,000 from Here, My Dear's Earnings, an album he wrote as a raw tell-all of their busted marriage. Its songs called out Anna's harsh control and coldness. He pointed out she cared more for the Gordys than him. It sold over 500,000 copies, but the royalties he forked over were a steep price for revenge, a bloody end to a once blazing love. His marriage to Janice crumbled soon after. Late 1978, in their LA apartment, Marvin stood before Janice, old pistol in hand, pressing it to her head, fingers shaky on the trigger, railing that who did she think she was, trying to rule him, make him ditch drugs and booze. Janice, clutching Nona, tears streaming, begged him to stop for the kids, not to ruin everything. Nona's cries made Marvin drop the gun. He collapsed, clutching his head. He didn't want this, but life's crushing weight had snapped his sanity. Janice fled with the kids, heart shattered. Cocaine killed their love. They divorced soon after. She asked for nothing, knowing his money mess. Beyond losing lawsuits, a fortune, and Janice, cocaine now owned Marvin. He sank into deep depression from all the piled-up pain. One rainy March night in 1979, in a black Cadillac in L.A., Marvin flung the door open, hurling himself out at 60 miles per hour, rolling on the road, blood pouring from his head and hands. He didn't want to live. His driver friend dragged him back, saying he had to stay for his kids, but Marvin sprawled in the back seat, gasping, asking why he couldn't just die. Each depressive wave brought new suicide tries. One June morning in 1980, in a Hawaii hotel, he swallowed a fistful of sleeping pills, crashing to the floor, clutching photos of Tammy, Nona, and Frankie, screaming inside that he couldn't take it, that the world was too cruel. Hotel staff found him in time, pulling him back from death again. After hitting rock bottom and surviving unwanted rescues, Marvin let himself go, drowning in addiction and flight. Tax agents always tracked him down, demanding payment, or he'd lose his song rights. Desperate, he fled to Ostend, Belgium, in March 1981, holing up in a damp seaside apartment. There, he tried rebuilding with Midnight Love. But doing it was harder than thinking it. In his lowest moment, Tammy haunted him. One mid-March day in 1983, Marvin stood by the sea, hands trembling from a heavy coke hit, staring at the black waves, yelling he was coming to Tammy, then leapt in. A passerby heard, raced over, grabbed his shirt, yanked him back. Marvin fell onto wet sand, sobbing, muttering he couldn't live or die. That stranger somehow got him, becoming a friend, pulling him from despair with afternoon talks. He even started quitting drugs with the guy's advice, making decent progress. By August 1983, Marvin rallied, returning to the U.S., hitting the Pacific Amphitheater stage in California before 10,000 fans. But tragically, this Marvin wasn't the one from a decade ago. His voice faltered, the mic hit the floor with a thud, blasting through speakers, the crowd booing, chucking beer cans on stage. Marvin flipped, threw the mic back at them, stormed off, vowing he'd rather die than face that shame. He never imagined that flop would be his last show ever. Marvin came home after nearly 2 years abroad, dodging taxes and kicking coke. He moved in with his parents at 2101 South Gramercy Place in LA's Crenshaw area, a house he'd bought them in the early 70s. Its white walls and sunlit windows once stood as his pride, a place to heal childhood scars. No one guessed it had become his tomb. On April 1, 1984, Marvin woke up, eyes bloodshot from a coke binge. The sting of that failed gig had dragged him back to the needle. Then Alberta's scream echoed from the downstairs bedroom. Marvin Sr., drunk, threatened her over a missing insurance letter, telling her to shut up or take a beating. Grown now, Marvin couldn't stand by while his mom was in danger. He charged downstairs, slammed his dad against the wall, landed 2 punches to his face, yelling he'd never hit her again. Alberta tried to stop him, and Marvin turned to head upstairs. But they didn't see Marvin Sr. stumble to the bedroom, grab the .38 Special, a Christmas gift from Marvin last year, then step out, firing once from 6 feet. The bullet tore through Marvin's heart. He dropped, body seizing, a second shot hitting his shoulder as he lay still. Alberta rushed to him, cradling him, wailing. Marvin Sr. snapped out of his rage, standing frozen, shaking his head, saying he didn't mean it. Cops and paramedics arrived at 12:45, but it was too late. Marvin died at 1:01 p.m. in the hospital, a day shy of his 45th birthday. The Prince of Soul fell by his father's hand in a cruel twist. News hit that afternoon, April 1st, first brushed off as an April Fool's prank, but by night, America mourned. His funeral on April 5th at Forest Lawn, L.A., drew 200,000 under a gray sky. Smokey Robinson spoke of his friend's painful end. Stevie Wonder sang, "I Heard It Through the Grapevine," voice breaking. But Marvin's death wasn't the end. That June afternoon in 1984, Marvin Sr.'s trial kicked off. He claimed self-defense, fearing Marvin would kill him. Lawyers added he had a brain tumor and alcoholism. The court pitied him, handing down 6 years probation and 5 years supervision instead of jail, thanks to a manslaughter plea deal. The ruling sparked outrage among family and fans, many saying he got off too easy as the victim's dad. But his wife took it hardest. Alberta regretted not escaping that devil sooner, leaving her son to pay the price. By December 1985, she divorced him. To settle IRS debts, she sold the Crenshaw house cheap, about $150,000, though it once symbolized Marvin's success. It sat abandoned after, a haunted spot to locals. Soon the house decayed, leaky roof, cracked walls, moldy stench, weeds choking the yard, like it was dying with Marvin. By early 1987, curious teens sneaked in through a loose back door, flashlights in hand, exploring Marvin Gaye's haunted mansion. Inside, dust-coated furniture, papers littered the floor, and dried blood stained the living room, the mark of that fatal day. One kid, shaking, swore he heard singing, Marvin's voice from a corner. Likely just wind through broken windows, but the tale spread, turning the house into a symbol of dazzling success and crushing tragedy. Locals whispered Marvin's soul lingered, trapped in the haven he'd hoped for.